May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Please be seated. Computer issues this morning, so I'm working with some paper. Imagine being on your hands and knees, close to the bare ground. All your sight and smell, the taste and touch is of dirt. Consider two worlds, one in which you're crushed, trampled by herds of people around you, so that there's clay grit between your teeth and you're breathing in the dirt. The other world, one in which you are whisked up off the ground and placed upright on your feet. Which world would you choose to live in? Imagine again being stooped over, trying to stand up straight. Maybe you've got a heavy load and are trying to get a better grip on it. Consider two worlds. One in which every time you try to shift the load and stand upright, a herd of people comes by and knocks into you, forcing you to stoop again just to keep your balance, or making you lose your grip on what you're holding so it falls, and you're forced to stop and stoop and pick it up again. In the other world, the herd of people moves slowly, deliberately to avoid collisions, or it even stops to help you carry your load so you can walk upright. Which world would you choose to live in? Imagine a third time you're a member inside the herd of people, just moving along, trying to keep with the flow and changes of direction, to avoid stepping on anyone else's feet. There are enough of you together so others actually help hold one another up. Would you even know which world of the two you inhabit? You might wonder sometimes if you suddenly felt something bumpy underfoot, but that might be just the change of terrain. Or if you heard some muffled sound, that might be someone crying out. But it also might just be your imagination. Would we know which of the two worlds we inhabit? Amos and Psalm 113 present these two worlds to God's people. In Amos, in the few verses we hear today, he calls out exploitation of the vulnerable, particularly by the self-serving and greedy among their neighbors. It's a fearful kind of world. There's a sense of scarcity, only so much of anything to go around. You have to be tough because you have to take what you need. Only the strong and powerful survive for long, and they'll never feel as if they have enough. The weak and poor are trampled in the struggle. Amos proclaims a shocking condemnation of the whole people of God for these crushing the lowly, oppressing the poor, and other failings. The prophet declares God's judgment on all the chosen: death. More shocking still is that the prophet doesn't offer a way out in some other part of the book. No chance that God can be appeased or appealed to for a change of mind. It's no wonder that for a long while the book of Amos was out of fashion. People prefer Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the others who offer hope beyond judgment. Except for a few lines, possibly, if you interpret creatively, Amos doesn't really offer hope. The only thing anyone can count on is God's destruction of them. I'll hazard a guess here, we would not choose to live in this world. Unfortunately, plenty of people in our nation and around the world know the taste of dirt in their mouths and the feel of it in their lungs. Psalm 113, on the other hand, praises God for lifting the weak up from the dust and the poor from the ashes, setting the lowly among the great. This is a God who could remain aloof on high, but chooses to stoop and be involved in creation. Nothing is too small to escape God's notice and concern. No person is unimportant or unworthy of God's attention. It is God's vision for humanity that no one be crushed or trampled or abandoned. I'll hazard another guess. We're all here because this is the kind of world we would choose to live in. And there's good news for us. From the beginning, God has invited humankind to participate in just this sort of world. The people of God are asked to share in a world founded on a divine vision of well-being for every person. Citizens of this world share a responsibility. If we want to live in this kind of world, the people of God are expected to act in accordance with that vision. Now, how many of us here sit at home plotting to ruin the poor, trample the needy, or burden those already weighed down? No one. When people here see anyone with a recognizable need, someone always steps up. Whether it's heartfelt, Project Echo meals, Calvert Arts Fest, Spudnik, or all the other ministries this place runs, hosts, or supports, people willingly embrace the idea that the vulnerable can and should matter. People here don't shy away from hunger, homelessness, or most anything. But what about less visible circumstances, or effectively invisible ones? Those issues for which we're in the middle of a herd of people on the move and unable to see the lowly on or near the ground. What about burdens we don't see because we don't live among the people who carry them, or we've never carried that kind of weight? This is where we need to recognize and listen to the prophet-like voices. Some we will recognize easily because they're church people and speak our language. Jack Woodford is an example. As a child, he experienced poverty and hunger and the shame that is attached to being poor. His community helped provide for his family then. As an adult, he could recognize that the children of Calvert County's poorer residents would have similar needs. He spoke to his church congregation, and the people of God listened and responded. They founded the first heartfelt chapter in the county. That has grown into some 18 churches providing backpacks of food for students in need across the county to cover the weekend when they don't have access to school meals. Some people, though, we might not immediately recognize as having prophet qualities. Barbara Ehrenreich was one until her death at the beginning of this month. In her classic book, Nickel and Dimed, on Not Getting By in America, she presented a social critique based on her experience trying to live by working jobs that paid the minimum wage of the time. It was the late 1990s, some of us will remember, and there was the notion in welfare reform circles that, quote, a job, any job, could be a ticket to a better life. She decided to investigate the reality for herself. She took a series of minimum wage jobs over the course of several months and in 3 different states. She went into it with a lot of planning and even some reserve funds to cover serious emergencies. She wasn't really prepared for what she found. She took jobs as a waitress, hotel maid, residential cleaning woman, Walmart clerk, and more. She discovered that there were few choices about where she could live, a sheer absence of housing availability, let alone the cost. Trailer parks and decaying residential motels. She had planned to cook meals to cut her costs, but couldn't find any place affordable to rent that came with more than a hot plate. Most of the time, she had to cheat and sneak a hot plate into her room because management prohibited them. She discovered that she had to work 2 jobs if she wanted a roof over her head that wasn't her car. Working multiple jobs effectively derailed cooking and often even sleep. With some jobs, she suspected that the real reason she was hired over others was only because she was a white woman who spoke fluent English. And although her jobs were labeled unskilled, survival required a specific set of skills specific to poverty. When she revisited her work about 10 years later, little had changed, except that even more people were trying to live on minimum wage, and that wage hadn't changed to keep up with the rising cost of living. If you haven't read her book, it's a wonderful, if uncomfortable, read. She raises up positive qualities of many of those trying to make their way in very challenging circumstances, including their tenacity and generosity. So why bring up Barbara Ehrenreich specifically? Because prophets like her and others help us to see things that are hiding in plain sight in our own communities. And even once we begin to see, it can be uncomfortable to stare directly at a problem, especially one that seems big or complex. We know how to feed hungry children or provide shelter to unhoused adults for a week at a time during the winter. But tackle the lack of affordable housing? It can seem intimidating, maybe even too big to approach. But it is on the scale of our community that we can engage. The success of Heartfelt and all the other programs we offer should give us the confidence that we can handle something larger and more complex. One such a project is All Saints Calvert Concept for Housing and Reconciliation Initiative. The creativity involved in that venture ought to pique our interest and stoke our curiosity. It's in the works. If you've been here for 3 or more years, you're probably aware of it. But perhaps if you haven't heard about it, let me summarize it this way. Barbara Ehrenreich's book highlighted the difficulty at times, the impossibility of finding housing that didn't eat up most of a worker's income. And Calvert County is no exception. We face both historical barriers with continuing consequences, such as redlining, and contemporary issues that are wiping out the retirements of some of our seniors. It's also hard, sometimes impossible, to attract and keep teachers and other professionals because they can't afford to live here. The Calvert concept is being developed and birthed to address these particular groups' needs in this particular community. It has another goal: to develop a model for housing and reconciliation that can be exported, that other communities can adapt to their particular contexts and needs. As it gets going, it will need absolutely every one of us in some way or shape. Perhaps the ultimate challenge for us is that rather than leaving one world for the other, we are expected to inhabit God's world at the same time that we live in an Amos kind of world. It's not unlike the science fiction idea of existing in two universes at one time. But with God's help, we can help to craft the world God envisions, the one we desire, from the one we have. Amen.